Do you have a critical spirit? It is so easy for us to look at the faults of someone else and not really consider our own faults. Jesus, at the beginning of Matthew chapter 7, in the Sermon on the Mount, talks about logs and specks. He makes a point in verse 3 that how can we look at the speck that's in our brother's eye when we don't see the log that's in our own eye? What he's saying is there that it's so easy for us to see the small fault in somebody else, but at the same time, we don't see our own faults. We have a tendency of looking at somebody else's issues and not see our own. Hey, if you're encouraged by the content, I would ask you to subscribe to the channel. And would you share this video with somebody right now? And back to the content. Boy, how many times in counseling we have gone through that where a couple will come in and they'll spend the whole time arguing how terrible, how much the other person has done wrong, and make no effort to look at themselves and see what part they've had in the process of arguing and the conflict that they have. Jesus goes on and says in the next verse, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. The log, that's big. It's something big that blocks our vision so that we can't help anybody else. That's key. In order for me to help somebody else, I've got to look at myself first. I've got to deal with my issues. I've got to deal with my heart. And boy, there's a lot of things that I've had to work on and I need to continue to work on. But for me to be able to help other people, I need to be in a good place spiritually and emotionally. And so that's why Jesus says, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Once you deal with yourself, then you can begin to help other people. You may see issues in somebody else's life, but don't start there. Start with yourself. In your marriage relationship, you may see issues in your spouse's life, but don't start there. Start with yourself. One of the things we talk about in marriage counseling is how important it is to cool down and not be filled with emotions, but to have a time apart so that you can reflect and not think about what the other person's done wrong, but ask the question, what have I done wrong? What have been my attitudes? What have I said? How have I handled this situation wrong? And then go to the other person, your spouse, and ask for forgiveness. We talk about this quite a bit, Janet and I, in our podcast. It's Married by Design. It's on Apple and it's also on Spotify. We'd encourage you to check that out. And the idea is that once you look at yourself, then you can begin to help other people. It's interesting in verse 1 of the chapter, Jesus says, judge not lest you be judged. And a lot of people would just take that verse and see, we should never say anything bad about anybody else. We should never confront or talk about an issue. And that's not what Jesus is saying, because later on he says, take out your own log, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother or your sister's eye. So the principle is not that we never encourage, we never confront, but that we look to ourselves first. We deal with our own heart, and therefore we're in a place where then we can begin to help other people. So I just want to challenge you to think about this. If you're in conflict with somebody else, maybe with your spouse, how much time have you spent thinking about their faults, what they've done wrong, what their issues are, and how much time have you spent thinking about yourself? And just to encourage you to apply Jesus's principle first, take some time, look at your own logs, your own sin, your own issues, and confess those to the Lord, acknowledge those failings, and then go to your spouse, go to the other person and ask for forgiveness. Say, will you forgive me for these logs, these sins, because I was angry, because I said those unkind things, because of the way I handled this situation? And ask them to forgive you. That's the way that we begin to deal with our logs, by acknowledging them in our mind, talking to the Lord about them, and then going to the person that we've sinned against and asking their forgiveness. And all that starts by me looking at myself. It starts by you looking at yourself, examining yourself, to get to a place where you can deal with all those issues and you can be reconciled to the person you love. I tell you, this is the way to be reconciled. You can spend years and years arguing with another person, always pointing out what they've done wrong, the way that they've failed. But when you humble yourself and you look at yourself first, and you're willing to go to your spouse, to that other person, and admit your faults, your logs, as Jesus says there, and ask their forgiveness in humility, that really breaks down the walls and will help you to be reconciled to the other person. Well, I hope that you'll do that. Read through Matthew 7, 1-5. And as you do that, God will work in your heart to change you, first of all, to help you to improve as a person. And also then you'll have the opportunity to help others. Well, God bless you as you follow Matthew 7, 1-5.